Until now, we've known him as the dull man of British politics, spreadsheet Phil, even to his friends. Philip Hammond has risen with barely a trace, but today he is emerging as one of the central figures as a new order judders into shape after the Brexit vote. So just who is Philip Hammond? Since his days as a teenager in Essex, there have been two Hammonds. Philip, the deadly serious student, businessman and politician, and then there is Phil, the resourceful entrepreneur and charmer with a twinkle in the eye.
We love to boogie. We love to boogie.
Suburban Essex may not have felt that it was quite at the centre of the universe in the 1970s. Luckily, a schoolboy entrepreneur and his close friend were on hand to enliven the scene.
There was one disco that used to take place in Shenfield, and everybody used to go to it. And Philip sort of said to me, well, we could do that. You know, why don't we do something like that? And so, to cut a long story short, Philip hired a hall, sold tickets, asked me if I'd DJ, and I was getting my, I don't know, whatever it was, 20 quid or something for DJing, and Philip was just making fortunes.
Even as a teenager, Philip Hammond was showing characteristics that would later serve him well.
1972, isn't it?
T-Rex.
That would be the sort of thing that I'd be playing with Philip, but if it hasn't got a Phoenix stamp on it, it would have been mine and not his.
Yes, that's right. Philip Hammond stamped all of the records owned by the business, even though they were in the care of his mate.
He once said to me that he wanted to be a millionaire, I think he said by the time he was 30. And I think he did actually achieve that in the end.
I remember going round to his house once. We got hold of half a bottle of sherry and proceeded to drink it. And very randomly, we ended up having a bit of a cheeky snog. Who'd have thought that Philip Hammond was such a good kisser?
He used to wear, as memory serves, quite a long black leather coat and black leather boots, and he had very long jet black hair that kind of hung like crow's wings down past his shoulders. He was very distinctive to look at, very tall, very aquiline, very thin, very beaky, and super confident. I can remember that in history classes, for example, he'd come in with his Daily Telegraph. He was always would finish his work, his classwork, ahead of everybody else. He was very, very bright. And then he'd put his big boots up on the desk and he'd start reading the Telegraph and swapping political dialogue with our history teacher, who was a Guardian reader. And usually, towards the end of the class, they'd swap papers, and then they would sort of score jolly points off each other, making political points. This was a 15-year-old schoolboy, but I do seem to remember him talking about the joys of getting rich. I seem to remember, and the fact that one shouldn't feel guilty about aspiring to make money.
Televised debate on the common market.
At Oxford, the political geek was in his element. Here he is watching the seminal debate at the Oxford Union in 1975, days before Britain first voted on its relationship with Europe. It took another 2 decades after making millions in business before Philip Hammond finally answered his true calling. In 1993, a familiar figure was watching.
There is a whole subclass of the population which no longer understands the distinction between right and wrong, between good and evil.
Philip Hammond was not elected to Parliament until his early 40s.
It is better they wonder why you do not speak than that they wonder why you do.
And he watched as youngsters such as George Osborne overtook him. His breakthrough came when Osborne appointed him as his deputy in the opposition Treasury team way back in 2007.
Newsnight understands that the future Chancellor almost quit the front bench at that point because the new post was technically a demotion. But he stayed on after he was tipped off about the move, giving him time to reflect on how it might eventually take him closer to his dream job.
Something that always struck me back then was I think it would have been very easy for someone in Philip Hammond's position being brought in as George Osborne's deputy, even though he's a decade older than him, to bear some resentment about that. But actually he never did, and I think that he understood that this was a balanced ticket, as you talk about in sort of US election terms, that George was younger, more political, the sort of driving force behind the leadership, and Philip was perhaps the safe pair of hands.
Good night. Bye. See you. Bye.
In the lengthy years of opposition and early days of government, Philip Hammond was seen as something of a dry, Eurosceptic Thatcherite. He was critical of the decision to legalise same-sex marriage, and on Europe, Some colleagues thought the man now dubbed the Secretary of State for Soft Brexit might even support an exit from the EU.
The Philip Hammond I knew at Defence was a pretty Eurosceptic individual, and certainly one who I thought would not make the change he's made now. I mean, now he is a very pragmatic figure indeed. I assume the Foreign Office has worked its usual magic on people, and he's seen the importance of this, of changing your mind when the facts change. And now he is indeed, appears to be, from the outside, leading the drive for a soft Brexit rather than the hard Brexit we might have expected some years ago from Philip.
But close friends say he was never an outer, just a classic sceptic who wanted to see the EU reformed.
There's been a widespread misunderstanding of the Conservative Eurosceptic position. The classic Eurosceptic position, which Philip, I think, wholeheartedly held, and 85% of the party, was that we are cautious of Europe, we think it needs reform, but we wouldn't leave.
Finally, at the age of 60 and after 19 years in Parliament, Philip Hammond secured his dream job when his Oxford contemporary Theresa May appointed him as her Chancellor in the summer.
Friends say the Chancellor regards himself as more of a finance minister than some grand political figure who meddles in every Whitehall department. His primary aim is to ensure financial stability. For now, that means resetting the dial on the economy by abandoning George Osborne's plan to achieve an overall budget surplus by 2020.
One Osborne ally believes the autumn statement will actually mark continuity with the old regime.
I think what we've seen with the new government, understandably, is a change of tone and a desire to draw a contrast with what went before. And Philip Hammond's contribution to that early on in his chancellorship, he talked about a reset of fiscal policy, and I think people probably overinterpreted too much meaning into that word reset. The reality on substance is I think it is largely continuity. Particularly Philip Hammond himself is a fairly straightforward fiscal conservative. He believes in balanced budgets, and I think that we will see evidence of that in the autumn statement this week.
Philip Hammond knows that his success will depend in large part on maintaining a constructive partnership with Theresa May. As passing acquaintances at Oxford, they have an effective, though not especially close relationship. He is dismissive of her approach on immigration, and I've learnt that the Treasury has been irritated by briefings that the Chancellor is wary of the Prime Minister's mission to champion the so-called jams, people who are just about managing. Philip Hammond sees some merit in this idea, but he's reminded Number 10 that his first priority must be to ensure financial stability.
The two Oxford contemporaries know their government will ultimately be defined by how successfully they navigate the UK's exit from the EU.
Newsnight understands that the Chancellor has some deep concerns on Europe. He's unimpressed by what he regards as the excessively optimistic claims of the Brexiteer ministers Boris Johnson and Liam Fox, and he fears that the UK could tumble out of the EU in a hard Brexit. Friends say he's so concerned about business uncertainty that he believes that the UK should negotiate a transitional deal to cover future trading relations at the same time as the Brexit talks. Theresa May appeared to float this idea yesterday, only for her aides to back away.
It is clear that one of the things that Philip is increasingly coming to the realisation is that we may need to put in place transitional arrangements so that negotiations don't have to stop in 2 years' time. It may well be in our national interest to continue those negotiations for some time to get the best deal for Britain.
While the Chancellor is wary of Liam Fox and Boris Johnson, he's re-establishing an alliance with the third Brexiteer, his one-time boss David Davis. Friends say Philip Hammond regards the Brexit Secretary as a grown-up who is immersing himself in the gritty detail of his job. Britain will have its first proper introduction today to the two Philip Hammonds. Spreadsheet Philip may be the man for the moment as the public finances enter a bumpy phase, but Phil, the confident charmer, will need all his political wiles to survive the choppy Brexit waters ahead.